Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. This is Reservations, and I'm Rain Whalen.
And I'm Ernest Riverside.
Is it
Yeah.
because we're on River?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
First episode of the new year, and that's a good one.
Yeah, I know. My
welcome-
creative juices weren't flowing, so I grabbed something I could say. I Kaiser Soze you.
Well, I mean, once again, like I just mentioned off mic, the season has taken us 10 fucking months. So I don't blame you that you are.
We run out of names after a while.
Yeah, you're pretty much done.
Almost home stretch.
But welcome back, everyone. And yes, first new episode of the new year. We hope everyone had a great New Year's. Jeremy, did you have a good New Year's?
Yeah, it was alright.
What did you and Haley do?
Nothing.
Ash, technically, Ashley and I didn't necessarily do nothing, but we hung out with her family because she has some family from East Texas, which, coincidentally, Ashley's great aunt, it was born in the same town that Haley's from.
Oh, bummer.
Sulphur Springs?
Yeah,
Bummer.
bummer, dude. Silver Spring sucks.
Your in-laws watch this and they just kick your door down
They know.
as we're recording.
They know it sucks. They know there's nothing to do there.
Man. But yeah, dude, it's hard to believe it's 2023 already. It feels like 2022 flew by.
Yeah. My aunt Dee Dee, who you met at the wedding, she asked me something. I don't remember what it was. It was something to do with like life goals or something. And I said, Dee Dee, I didn't think I'd make it this far. So every day is just a treasure, you know?
Every day is a blessing. Especially, keeping your Thetan levels high,
I mean, like, I try to keep them as low as I can, but, you can't, without regular auditing. Guys, this is why auditing sessions are very important.
Scientology is a cult, everyone.
Scientology sucks, y'all.
Well, before we get into it, I really wanted to talk about it, but then like everything just sort of lined up where we weren't going to get to talk about it until this episode. We finally saw The Whale.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Anyone, if you have the opportunity, definitely go check it out. My mom said something that I really agree with, because as I mentioned off mic, she finally saw it. We're watching Brendan Fraser become Charlie. Brendan, I feel like, kind of fell into this trap of being a character actor, but there's no Brendan Fraser here. It's all Charlie. I know.
It's a brilliant performance. It's definitely Oscar worthy. It's so weird to talk. Now when I say things like that, it's sort of like, who fucking cares? Fuck the Oscar. You know what I mean? Fuck all that shit. That used to be like my night. I used to like, no one fucking call me, no one come talk to me. Like, I'm watching the Oscars tonight. You know what I mean? And now it's just like, I'm not even going to watch it this year.
Do you think it's because you feel that way just because of everything that's happened over the years, and then especially with last year of Will ruining the entire night?
I mean, it just doesn't matter. I think the longer these awards exist, the less they matter. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
Or maybe that's just me being cynical. I don't care anymore. The way we consume information about film and the way we find out about stuff and the way that we discover films is completely different. So I think, what the Oscars really is, or was, is, hey, these were the great films this year that you missed, right?
Yeah.
You should go check these out whenever you can, right? Now it's just like, I know.
Yeah.
Or
I mean,
the market is so oversaturated that it's like I haven't heard of half of these. I don't know what you're talking. You know what I mean?
yeah, that's true.
So it just who fucking cares?
Well, and also,
How we
in
wins?
recent
Who
years,
fucking cares?
yeah. Well, and also recent years, a lot of the movies that you and I really loved didn't even make it. Like the one that people can see right there, The Green Knight. So,
Right. Yeah.
oh, and
Green
speaking
Knight.
of which,
Yeah.
well, let's just say, speaking of which, the elephant in the room. If you're watching on YouTube, Jeremy and I are not in the same room right now. Um, Ashley and I had a bit of a COVID scare. We were around someone who just tested positive, so to play it
Name
safe,
names.
I'm not naming names,
Name names.
but they know who they are. But to play it safe, because we're all supposed to hang out on Friday for Mr. Jeremy's birthday coming up. We wanted to play it safe and didn't want to get Jeremy sick, especially if we're going to be hanging out. So, anyway,
I'm
so
immune to COVID, so it doesn't matter.
I was going to say something you're going to get so mad at me for, but I'm not going to say it. So if you tuned in last week, I was going to say last year.
You still said it, and I'm still mad at you. Go ahead.
If you tuned in last week, today we are talking about The Sweet Smell of Success. Like I mentioned last week, I don't remember where I heard about this movie or why I so desperately needed the Criterion version, but I'm glad I did.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I don't remember where I heard about it either. If I'm being honest
Yeah,
with
that's
you.
that was just what I was about to ask you. Where did you hear about it?
Maybe like maybe research for film noirs or something, because it's technically under that category. We'll get into why that's weird in a little bit, but maybe that's where I heard about it. I can't imagine me looking up like Tony Curtis's filmography for some reason. I don't know, or Burt Lancaster's for that matter. My uncle Roy told me years ago I need to see The Swimmer with Burt Lancaster, which is on my shelf over there, and I haven't watched it yet, but heard it's incredible.
And your Uncle Roy is pretty. He's pretty good to. Or no, that's your cousin. Never mind. I was gonna say your Uncle Roy is pretty quick to comment. So he's gonna hear that you still haven't watched it and be mad
No,
at
he
you.
knows. He knows I haven't seen that shit. I'm going to eventually, maybe, see it because I loved Burt Lancaster in this film. But yeah, I don't remember where I heard about it. I just, whatever tipped me off about it, I was like, oh, that's interesting. It may have even been, oh, the cover looks cool on the Criterion, and I was like, okay,
Yeah.
or something, right? Because it is.
Yeah,
I have it
yeah.
right here. It is very cool, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
but
I'm glad you put that up. I was gonna have Future Rain do a have something
No
kind
need.
of slide across the screen, but
no need. But anyway, I guess we can start with first impressions.
yeah, since this was the first time for the two of us.
Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
I loved it, man. And I really wanted to. I know we'll get into it as we always do, but the whole time I was watching, I was like, Jeremy's gonna love this movie. I was like, I could feel it, because no one in this world is a quote unquote good person.
No.
And I was like, Jeremy's gonna love this. I just know it. Now, granted, that's what made me love it too. I was like, I'm glad we're not following anyone who is morally good or even morally neutral. Our main characters are bad people, and I was like, okay, that's sort of fresh, especially for 57. Yeah, because we'll get into it. I don't want to jump all over it, but I loved that our main characters, two of our main characters, are awful human beings.
Yeah, I read in an article today that it says Sidney is bad, JJ's worse, right?
Yeah.
Which it's sort of their, dynamic of, Burt Lancaster in this film is the antagonist, I guess.
For sure. For sure.
The main antagonist, if we had these sort of traditional tropes, which we kind of don't, right? I loved it. You're right.
Yeah, I knew you would.
If anything, it was because I loved the way people spoke in this movie. The violence doesn't come with shootouts or fist fights or anything. It's all just dialogue. It's all just breaking people down with their words, right? Which is sort of like an underlying theme of this, where the pen is mightier than the sword is sort of the theme of this film, because it deals with gossip columnists, and it deals with publicity, it deals with all that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Quick synopsis. We have Sidney Falco, who is a publicity agent, I guess, is what they said he was.
Yeah. And
his main source of getting his clients' information out there is through, hold on, I'm going to get it, J.J. Hunsaker. J.J. Hunsaker is a very well-respected and somehow powerful gossip columnist, who is based on a real person, and we'll get to that later. And they have this sort of weird relationship where Hunsaker, that's going to happen a lot, because the Hudsucker Proxy is a movie I'm familiar with, and it's so similar. I'm going to say that so many times. Okay. Hunsaker had tasked Falco with breaking up Hunsaker's kid sister and her boyfriend. His name is Steve Dallas, and he's a jazz guitarist, which is cool. If you know anything about jazz, it's hard to be a jazz guitarist. And the relationship between JJ and Susie is sort of weird, and we'll get to that a little bit later as well. But initially, Falco failed at this job because she is still with this guy, right? And in fact, it's getting more serious. And so now the film carries out with, well, let's try again or else, right?
Yeah.
All the while, it's sort of like Falco is still trying to get into Hunsaker's good graces and just trying to stay relevant, right? In the film, he says that Hunsaker is the golden ladder to where he wants to be, right? Needs it's almost like he needs his, I don't know, okay, or his say so, or it's so strange, the relationship. Anyway.
Yeah.
Trial and error, things don't go well for Falco, right? As he's trying to break these two up. He finally succeeds, but to what end, right? And the movie ends with him getting arrested and Susie just going off on her own, finally getting some independence and some confidence in herself, and leaving the shadow of these two men that have been controlling her life, right? That's pretty much Sweet Silent Success. And the title in and of itself is sort of cool for a 1957 audience. So where do you want to start?
I say the obvious choice would be to start with Sidney, in my opinion, but let's start with JJ, because I don't think I've ever been so... I don't think I've ever seen a bully on camera like I have seen with JJ, and you're right, like what you said with that article. He is the worst, and and even and we'll get into it, but I just wanted to mention, like, even when Falco succeeds in his mission, it's still not good enough for JJ, you know. And you know, and he but okay, let's just start with JJ. Let's do that. So, spoiler alert, I have never seen Burt Lancaster or Tony Curtis any other movies before. So this was a first for me.
That's a real shame.
On both of those fronts.
Yeah.
But I mean, definitely, like we've mentioned on multiple episodes this season, JJ is definitely written as someone you love to hate.
Yeah, because you're almost gravitated towards him because you're wondering why he pulls people in, and he's powerful in a way that's sort of strange because he's just a gossip columnist, right? That shouldn't be that important, right? But when you see that, you know, whatever he writes, it explodes, right? I mean, it is what people take as truth, right? People take as fact, and it's what he can elevate someone to a higher level, or he can break someone down, right? And destroy them, right? Which again is why the dialogue, the way people speak to one another is so important in this, and why it's, you know, so highlighted, I think. And that's probably why he's being treated as such, as this powerful presence and this someone to be respected and feared, right? And then there's that weird thing with Susie, right? His sister.
Yeah,
so,
that is.
So, as I've said, he is based on a real person. He is based on I have it written down, a gossip columnist, Walter Winchell. And Walter Winchell had a very strange relationship with his daughter, right? Sort of a similar thing where he would sabotage every relationship she had and maintained an ever-present male presence in her life, right?
Okay.
It was almost incestuous, right? Which is gross. But we can see that here, right? The Lehman, who wrote the novel, or novella, sorry, knew him in some sort of fashion, despised him. Very similar to when we spoke about Mank and his relationship with what's his face, who is the newspaper guy.
Charles Dance's character.
Yeah.
I know.
And it's sort of that, right? Like he saw something he didn't like, wrote a character based on that person, and here we are. And, you know, it's sort of like a highlight of like the seedy underbelly of New York, right? These people doing pretty low life things. However, not necessarily illegal, right? They're just ethically bad, right?
Yeah. Not till sort of the very end.
Yeah, we're almost done. Illegal. Like 20 minutes left, and then somebody does something illegal, right? So, So Hunsaker is, again, based on this real person, right? Who had that weird thing with, and so that's why that relationship is so strange, and why the plot is why there's so much of this in the plot is this weird thing. He changed it to sister, which I guess is a little better.
It's still weird, but I guess not as weird as
still
daughter.
Weird, right? And also a weird thing about JJ's character is that the only sort of traditional film noir lighting we get is when he is being intimidating, or when he is trying to loom over someone,
Mm-hmm.
and where he is being a threatening presence, right? That's where we sort of get this high contrast lighting where he is just doused in shadow, right?
Yeah.
And you can really see the contours of his face and where the light hits him, and it's, it's pretty cool. You can see it in the beginning of the film when Falco goes to see him at that restaurant.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
And
yeah.
he's being very intimidating and awful to everyone at the table, but just being a controlling presence, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah. JJ is definitely someone that Daddy didn't say "I love you" to enough.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah, man. I wasn't expecting the plot to be so centered around this. Like when I read the back, because Ashley wasn't really paying attention, mainly because she wanted to read her book. So I put my headphones on so I could watch. But I could tell certain times she would kind of like. And so before I started watching it, she was like, "What is this movie even about?" And I read the back of it, and I just kind of figured like this would be like the B plot within the movie. That the A plot would be, what these guys do day in and day out.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, this is the whole movie, is Sidney
Yeah.
being this dude's lackey apparently. And yeah, and I was actually kind of waiting for the shoe to drop, that they were going to openly admit that the relationship was more than just brother sister. But of course, I guess that's too taboo for 57.
Maybe. But, it's also, I think, in this case, you could even argue that if obviously those undertones are there, and they're almost not undertones, but
Yeah.
you could also argue that it's just JJ is so used to being in control, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Susie is someone he can control 100%, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's...
when she is in a relationship, when she is getting serious with someone like Steve Dallas, it's threatening his control, right? It's taking that away from him, and he wants it back, right? Whether he means to or not, whether or not he even realizes that's what he's doing, right?
Yeah.
He just knows he doesn't like it.
Yeah. Yeah, because all he'll admit is that he just doesn't like this guy, and that's it. And it sounds like he's only met him once, and maybe didn't get I don't know, but I think you're right. I think you're right. I think it's definitely, to him, control is probably definitely equated with power, and if he doesn't have the power, then he doesn't have the control.
Yeah.
Which would make sense with why JJ feels like he can stand up to a U.S. senator and put the U.S. senator pretty much in his place.
And he can, because the U.S. senator is there with a prostitute. So it's like, what are you going to do? I have this information, right? And again, that's what makes him so powerful, is he collects information, right? It's just gross, terrible information, for blackmail or for spite or, whatever. Or for readership, which is most of what he wants.
Yeah. Well, and then, good transition, we have Sidney.
Yeah.
Who is not I wouldn't necessarily call him the anti-JJ, but...
No, because it's almost like he wants to emulate, right?
Yeah.
There is a great line, which I'm going to convince you to be the title.
Okay.
Where they're at the table and JJ leans in. He goes, "Match me, Sidney." Right?
Mm-hmm.
And it means two things. One, light my cigarette for me. Right.
Yeah.
Light it for me. Right? Which is a type of control, which is a type of a manipulation. Right? And two, do what I do. Right? If you want the success that you actually want, right?
That you,
If you
yeah, that you
want
claim
to,
you want.
yeah, if you want to use me to elevate yourself, do what I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be like me, right? And so there are times in this film where it's so bizarre because Hunsaker is treating Falco like garbage. I mean, just straight
Mm-hmm.
garbage. And then he'll just be sitting there, and Hunsaker pulls out a cigarette, and immediately Falco gets the lighter, you know, and holds it up
Mm-hmm.
to him, puts it in his pocket, and then stands behind him in support. It's so bizarre, right?
Well, and okay. Here, before we get into that, well, no, I think Sidney, I think he sees JJ as sort of as a means to an end,
Mm-hmm.
in a way. I think more so he's like, okay, if I do this, I'll get in his good graces, I'll get the column, and then everyone will know me like him, and then I don't ever have to associate with him ever again.
Mm-hmm.
At least maybe that's what I gathered from Sidney, because they do paint Sidney as somewhat you want to root for him. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't want to root for him. I'm like, I hope he does not succeed. And breaking up, especially because he has such great conversation with Susie about Dallas, and it almost seems like he understands, like, okay, like this is really important to her, but he still goes through with this, this plan.
Yeah.
But to me, that's what it felt like, is that he's using JJ to get what he wants. He just knows, like, well, whatever he does, I've got to back him.
Yeah.
That way I can earn myself enough credit. That way he can depend on me, and then yada yada yada.
Yeah, and
At least, like I said,
they're both sort of morally corrupt in different ways. For instance, Falco's not as morally, unethical than JJ is. However, there's this great scene where he goes and meets that comedian, right?
Mm-hmm.
And while that day earlier, he read a piece of the next issue of the column, right? And it's talking about that comedian, and it's talking about how great he was, and everyone was screaming in laughter. It was a great night, right? Really, lifting him up, right? So he uses that information, right? Article hasn't come out yet. He goes and he talks to the comedian to convince him that he's the guy, he's the publicist for him, right? He goes, pretends to call Hunsaker, tells him exactly what he read earlier that day, knowing that it's going to be there anyway, right? And to make it seem as if he is the one that came up with the idea, that came up with the wording that got him to write it in the article, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's slimy, but it's cool, right? It's genius, right? He's playing to that sort of like seedy, sort of wily trope of this, gross publicist, right?
Yeah, well, and Sydney's, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't expecting him to have a multifaceted plan.
Mm-hmm.
So Sidney is shockingly very intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
He just, I think, exactly what you've been saying. He's just really slimy about it,
He was slimy.
Which, it makes it hard for you to root for him.
Yeah.
But it definitely seems like they want us to root for, at least until the last 20 minutes. Like, they want us to root for Sidney. Because there are some things that Sidney's really slimy on. Like when he pretty much prostitutes out his friend, who's Rita, who's clearly got a thing for him, and he pretty much whores her out so he can use this other writer to smear Dallas, which was phase one of his plan.
Yeah.
And, you know, but then for a brief moment, he turns his nose up to the idea of planting evidence on Dallas. Like, oh, I would never do that. Like, no, this is too much for me. But with the bribe of, well, you'll get to run my column for 3 months, that's what pulls him back in, and he's like, oh, well, I guess I can do this. So, yeah, it's hard to root for Sidney, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm going to be honest, I was, when things started coming to a head at the end, I was like, oh man, I'm going to feel so bad for him. But as the movie began to unfold, because I knew Sidney was going to get his comeuppance.
Mm-hmm.
When Susie entered in her own sort of con, I was like, yeah, I don't feel bad for Sidney. He kind of brought this on himself.
Yeah.
Which, again, made it hard to root for him. But I mean, by that point, I wasn't rooting for him. I was rooting for Susie. And like, get yourself out of there, please.
Right. Yeah. Manipulate, these two men who manipulate you all the time. Right?
Yeah.
She turned them against you. It was brilliant, right? So it's funny you mention the planting of evidence. I also read that Walter Winchell, who Hunsaker's based on, was friends with J. Edgar Hoover.
Really?
And would use his connection with J. Edgar Hoover to run smear campaigns for the people he didn't like, and especially the people who wanted to date his daughter. Right? Isn't that interesting?
Very interesting, especially because Hoover was
Gross.
not the best person either. Yeah, gross too.
And again, he was basically a gossip columnist too,
Yeah.
J. Edgar Hoover. So,
very, very interesting.
I know.
Very interesting. Yeah. All right. So, okay. Do you want to talk about Susie? Because even though she doesn't have a lot of screen time, she is the main. I don't want to reduce her down to a plot device, but she kind of is sort of a plot device in a way.
Yeah, I agree. She, up until the last 5 minutes, is just used for manipulation, right? Mm-hmm. And with JJ, of course, it's just power over her. It's control, right?
Mm-hmm.
With Falco, it's, I need to get in good with your brother, so can you just help me out, right?
Yeah.
And when she's like, no, he was like, well, then I'm just going to make it happen anyway, right? He sort of presents himself as someone she can trust until, of course, he was just using that information against her, which, it's gross.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, it's not up until, she gets that idea or whatever, the plan to, fake a suicide attempt, lure Falco to her place, make it look, a little suggestive, wait for JJ to come in, and then, make it seem like he was, there for nefarious purposes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And which is really interesting because when Falco leaves, JJ immediately was like, "No, man, I believe him. You were trying to commit to," you know what I mean? It's so bizarre because he's like, "I didn't buy it for a second." You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. It's there's a lot of gaslighting in this movie.
a lot of gas, a lot of double crossing. Yeah,
a lot of girl bossing, a lot of gaslighting.
Girl bossing. I remember
Girl,
that.
well, actually, that's meant to be used as for a woman who is the boss. She's a girl boss, you know. But I'm using it as more as they're bossing poor Susie around.
Got it. Okay.
But the main thing is a lot. There's so much gaslighting. Like when sort of I would say phase 2 of Falco's plan comes into play, which is that as he kind of tells JJ, they're going to come to you and beg for you to get him his job back. And then you know, you just be you know, and it's just so much. I was not expecting that much gaslighting.
Yeah.
In this movie, but again, for the time, 1957, I was like, well, I don't expect any less, though. I mean, especially with the line, which I had to pause and tell Ashley about it. The line of Sidney telling Susie that he wishes that most women wouldn't think with their heads and not with their hips.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's not okay to say now.
Again, it's, these insults, right, are doing what a shootout would do in another movie, right? They're hard hitting, they're fast, right? And they're well written, right? It's like it's like these people are so eloquent in their insults, right? And they're using hyperbole, they're using analogy, they're using, right? It's fascinating. I mean, we could talk forever about, the list of all these one-liners that they get off to one another.
Yeah. Yeah, there were times where I was like, ooh, got him. Like, damn, he got him good.
Yeah.
But then and if I'm being honest, I didn't really realize that until you said that a while ago about how that it's words and how these characters are speaking to each other is the violence towards one another.
Yeah.
Because I was I was curious about that because when I read the back of the Criterion box and it said showing the kill or be killed nature of journalism in the 50s, I was like, okay, then someone's definitely going to die. And shockingly, no one dies.
No.
But definitely a lot of people's pride are injured and definitely feelings are hurt. Little fifis are hurt.
Feelings definitely were hurt. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Especially in my opinion, the two women that really care for Sidney and didn't really want him helping JJ, or even probably more specifically associated with JJ, which was Mary, his secretary, and Rita. Because Rita, I think both of them definitely have a thing for him. Or at least Rita has romantic feelings, and Mary knows he could be so much more.
Yeah.
But it's sort of, but as we see, Sidney has sort of resigned himself. Like, no, this is who I am. I'm the middle guy.
Yeah, or he's just trying to do what he can to make it. What that means, I don't know. But he obviously, to him, he hasn't, right? So,
yeah.
Yeah, it's the dialogue is just so important, and again with that underlying sort of the theme of the pen is mightier than the sword, where we have these characters who are using writing to either help or hurt, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like that's their, you're right, that's their form of weapons, and cutting each other down and putting people in their place, and the constant back and forth is it's such a different way of showing violence. Which you're right. It's basically a fight, right?
Yeah, I mean, things do get physical towards the end of the movie. With that fucking. Even though I didn't like JJ, that fucking cop, I think I hated him the most. Fuck that guy. But poor Dallas gets the shit kicked out of him.
Yeah.
And then JJ slaps Sidney around, and then Sidney gets beat up by Kello. So, the violence doesn't really come, like the physical violence doesn't really come until, truthfully, everything's kind of come to a head.
Yeah.
The chess game has ended, and now these are the consequences, essentially. And, and I didn't really pick up on that, again, until you brought up everything about the words, because I was like, oh yeah, they pretty much talk the whole time. Talk and scheme.
Because Falco tries to use it on that other guy because he has information that he cheated on his wife, right?
Mm-hmm. That columnist who cheated with Rita.
Right. And it's funny you even mentioned a chess game because his wife says, "Are we playing checkers or chess? What's going on?" Right?
Oof, yeah.
They keep moving that note back and forth.
Yeah.
And good for that guy that was like, you know what, fuck you. I'll tell her straight up right now. It's almost like this isn't the first time that Falco has tried to hold something over him, and he's sick of it, and and of course he's like the best guy in the movie, and he sucks.
I know. I did read that this movie was a bit of a failure because, much like how we mentioned in our 12 Angry Men episode, shout out to our very first series ever on the podcast.
Yeah.
No, second series. First series was 80s movies. Second series, but it was kind of like with Henry Fonda?
Yeah.
Yeah. That Tony Curtis had made a name for himself as the nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then here he is playing this just scumbag, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I read that a lot of Tony Curtis fans, when this movie came out, were none too pleased by it.
Yeah, I can see that because a few years before it was like Some Like It Hot, He's in that with Jack Lemmon, and he's hilarious in that, of course.
Yeah, it's
right.
But
he's not playing someone terrible,
It's right there, right there where my finger is. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but and also I didn't realize until I looked it up, he's Jamie Lee Curtis's dad.
Oh yeah, I knew that. You didn't know that?
No, of course I didn't know that. I knew that Jennifer Lee was her mom, the first, Scream Queen, Janet Lee, first Scream Queen. I told that to Ashley. I was like, "Oh, do you know who his daughter is?" And she was like, "Who?" And I was like, "His name is Tony Curtis." And she was like, "Oh, Jamie Lee Curtis."
Yeah, nice try trying to be slick on that one.
Oh no, I was intentionally talking his name up. But anyway. But yeah, but even though I still feel like Tony Curtis put on a hell of a performance as Sidney, this guy who, you said it perfectly, is trying to do what he thinks he needs to do to make it big. Because that's really all Sidney wants, is he wants to be recognized as like JJ, the guy in the column.
Yeah, he wants to be respected and maybe even feared. Maybe he likes, that dynamic between Hunsaker and everybody else. People are terrified of him, and he likes that, right?
Yeah.
He sees that as a higher sign of respect than anything. And that's why he, as little morals as he has, he sacrifices the last remaining morsel of it to plant those drugs on Dallas, right?
To plant those marijuana cigarettes.
That's right. Yeah. And Jesus. And it didn't do him any favors, because no matter what, Hunsaker, is going to come out on top. He's going to double cross, right?
Mm-hmm.
And keeping that sort of company doesn't usually, end up with you having all the success in the world, right? Going back to all of our mob films that we've done, it's fun till it's not.
I was just about to say, like, if anyone needs any other understanding, go back and listen to all of our Scorsese mob movies. Yeah, I was just gonna say, it's fun till it's not.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about. We mentioned at the top of the show, this film is considered a film noir.
Yes, that surprised me, because we have done noirs. Rafifi. Well, I mean, Rafifi's a heist film, but in a way, it is noir.
Yeah. We even did a whole episode just on film noir.
Yeah. If anyone wants to listen to that, you can go back and listen to when Jeremy and I had no direction on the podcast, and listen to a 2-hour long, essentially lecture of Jeremy lecturing me on film noir.
And what's so interesting about this film is that it's really kind of not, right? If you look at what a film noir is on paper, you're like, okay, femme fatale, not really, right? Stark contrast lighting, kind of only in certain spots, right?
Mm-hmm.
Crime, not until the last 20 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Nobody does anything illegal until he plants those drugs, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not right what they're doing, morally and ethically speaking, but it's still legal, right? And so we're not even in that crime aspect anymore. The only main thing that it holds of film noir is setting, which is New York. New York is, in and of itself, a character, which is what film noir does best, right? We see in M, it's Berlin. We see in like the Asphalt Jungle, I think that's also New York. In Double Indemnity, it's wherever that's in, right? Blanking on it, but it's the city itself is very important, which is what makes it a film noir, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the other stuff sort of comes and goes, right? I think that Susie becomes a femme fatale, but not only till the very end, right?
Yeah.
And so we have these tropes of film noir, but they're few and far between, yet together, I guess it still kind of culminates into a film noir, all told. If anything, it's a ethical film noir, meaning that, yes, there's not necessarily lots of crime going on, but ethically speaking, it's deplorable, and that's what makes it so, right?
Yeah. I mean,
it's also the tail end of that era also. So
yeah, I was just about to say, like, aren't we getting ready for noirs to enter in sort of the neo-noir, like Chinatown?
Yeah, I mean, we're 57, so yeah, we're a few years away from it being gone, right?
Yeah.
Or at least not ever present, which is what it was, in the 40s, and where that sort of post-war era, sort of drove a very dark tone into American filmmaking. But
yeah,
here we're even on the tail end of the golden age of Hollywood also, where that's starting to go away.
Yeah. Shout out to just a couple weeks ago, our last picture show.
Yeah.
That was the
beginning of New Hollywood.
Yeah, and I like what you said. This is the beginning of the victory of New Hollywood, and So this
Yeah,
movie
so
is sort of,
Golden Age is going away, film noir sort of going away, where you see these remnants of film noir still with, all the things I mentioned, but it not being ever present, right?
yeah, I was just about to say, it seems like this movie is sort of in the in between,
Yeah,
kind of one foot out the door, one foot still
yeah,
in a way,
completely. I completely
which
agree
I,
with that.
which I think makes it is why it's so good because, we're like you said, it's hitting with an asterisk, it's hitting the film noir check boxes,
Mhm.
but it's also sort of trying to maybe emulate what New Hollywood sort of brought in, or like right before. But I mean, even if the movie was made as a full blown noir, I think it would still be just as good, you know.
Mhm. If you want to think of it like sound, this is sort of like the very beginning hum of a siren off in the distance. It's coming toward you, right? Because we're getting a little bit of New Hollywood with the sort of characters we're dealing with. Like we were talking about, there is really no protagonist, right?
Yeah.
People are kind of awful, right? In this movie,
Yeah.
it's not completely awful, right? No one's breaking too many laws, but no one's doing anything too horrible. But we're getting a little bit of that, which would later become more present with New Hollywood, where characters are sort of anti-heroes and they're sort of hard to root for, and we're telling stories of real flawed people, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're sort of at the very, very beginning of that, I think, with this film, and it's almost confused because then it's like, but we're still in this era, so let's put in some lighting, let's make New York a big thing, let's,
Yeah.
it's it's sort of, you're right, in that in between area, which is really fascinating. Um, okay, do you want to talk about the title?
I would love to talk about the title because I was wondering if, because most movies in the 50s somehow kind of circled back to a meaning somewhere hidden in the movie. And I was wondering if we were going to, and we got it. And I absolutely love it. Of Sidney celebrating at the bar and celebrating his new favorite perfume, Success. And I was
And
just like, that's awesome.
what I read, he's sort of disgusted with himself when he says that, and here's why. So originally this was the title of the novella. He had to change it, okay?
Okay.
Because it's sort of said, it's sort of sarcastic, because what he means by sweet smell, he means, I read, sweet he means ripe, and smell he means putrid odor, right? So a ripe putrid odor of success, right? This sort of, you got it, but at what cost? Like what did you have to do to get there? And
Right. Okay.
sort of like, it's and even the success is what, right? It's, you became more like this horrible person, congratulations, right?
Yeah.
And in 1957 that was a little more obvious, is what I was reading.
Yeah. Yeah, I was because
they kind of realized that's sort of ironic and it's sarcastic.
Yeah, because I obviously, didn't pick up on that. I mean, I could tell that he was a little off while he said it, but
Mm-hmm.
I thought for sure it was just because he was like, I did it.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah. And I think that once you think about it, we would have gotten there eventually.
Yeah.
I don't think we always would have saw this title in face value, because if you read the title, like Sweet Smell Success, I don't know what that means. Who cares? You finish the film, you read it again, you're like, well, right? Because
Yeah.
you can kind of see that sense of irony and that sense of sarcasm where sweet and smell don't really mean those two things, right? They're sort of the opposite. And again, smell being, a strange word anyway. For some reason, I think. But again, after reading it, it's like, okay, that makes a lot more sense. And it's so strange that he had to change it the first time with his novella. And it's called, hold on, Tell Me About It Tomorrow is what the novella is called. Not the first time he put these characters in a story either. He has them in other stories, but like in just sentences, right? Like they're not main characters, but in this one he made the main character. Yeah.
Kind of like how, in shout out to our Rules of Attraction, the book.
Yes.
Patrick's mentioned.
Yeah.
But yeah. But yeah, I mean, now that you're saying it, now it makes a lot of sense that it was like, yeah, you did it, but at what cost? Right. At what really did you gain?
Yeah.
Sure, you gained a little bit of credit for this awful person, but what was really gained from this?
Yeah, what does the success look like now? Right?
Yeah.
The definition of it and what you thought you were going to gain from it, what you actually got, right?
Yeah.
Dude, I'm telling you, man, the performances in this are outstanding, right?
Absolutely.
Tony Curtis, I mean, he's slimy and gross yet charismatic at the same time, able to keep up, with Lancaster, who at this point had his own production company. I'm sure you saw.
Yeah, I saw. Yeah, I saw his name. I was like, oh, and was that also Arthur Hill? Was one of them? Because it was like Lancaster, Hill, and something else.
Hetched. Hold on, I'll tell you. Give me a few seconds. It's James Hill.
Okay.
Harold Hetched. James Hill, and Burt Lancaster. Uncredited producer is Janet Leigh.
Oh.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Tony Curtis was also an executive producer. He was also uncredited.
So it sounds like they really wanted to get this movie made.
Yeah.
Which,
and
I mean...
you can see why.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I did read that again. It was... The test screening was a bit of a failure, but as the years have gone on, people have begun to see, like, oh, wow, this movie was actually outstanding.
Right.
Which I agree.
Okay, so here's some fun facts about the writer, Ernest Lehman, who wrote the novella. He also wrote the screenplay.
Oh, okay.
He wrote North by Northwest.
Oh.
Yep. He wrote the screenplay for West Side Story.
No shit.
And Sound of Music. And he also wrote the screenplay. I know. He also wrote the screenplay for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Yo!
Yeah.
That's what's up.
Yeah. So very accomplished writer. Hello, Dolly was also on that list. Which is pretty cool.
Damn, tying it all the way back to season 2.
Yeah. Oh, man, I love Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Yeah, shout out to our Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf episode.
Yeah.
Stage to screen. I know, that was a good episode.
We could do another one, by the way. Another stage to screen series. There's more, so.
I mean,
The Whale counts. So.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of these seasons you'll get. I mean, next season you'll get to do a series. So
We might do times 2. We'll do it again.
Well, so Jeremy, are you ready to wrap up?
I am. Amazing film. It has 100% Metascore on IMDb. It is on Roger Ebert's greatest films list. It's on 1001 movies to see before you die. I mean, this is like one of the big ones. So, we did it.
Yeah, man, I absolutely loved it. Glad I finally got to open up my Criterion.
Yep. That book is so thick, by the way. I didn't read it, but
I know, dude. No, I was gonna read it last night, but by the time I finished the movie, because I stayed up late to do some chores, do some laundry, I was like, I'm not reading this. So I put my disc back in, closed it up, put it back on the shelf.
Yeah. Hey, you actually watched the disc this time. That's a rarity.
Well, it's because I decided not to be lazy and fuck around, and so I was like, all right, I need to watch it tonight.
Yeah.
No excuses.
Yeah.
So
Haley slept the entire time, so she didn't even watch.
Well, it's okay. Y'all are married now, so
yeah,
she doesn't legally have to do anything.
No, she doesn't. That was in the contract. She said, I legally do not have to watch a movie with you. I said, okay.
If it's not in color, I'm not watching it.
I did put it in. She goes, oh, it's this kind of movie. I go, yeah, I don't know what you mean by that.
What does that mean? Explain yourself.
Every time I tell her we're going to watch a movie, she goes, her first question always is it scary? I said, no. And then she asked again, are you sure? I said, yeah, I promise. And then I put it in. She goes, oh. And then immediately went to sleep.
Oh, it's black and white. Never mind.
Yeah.
Gross. All right. So, Jeremy, are you ready to hear what we're going to talk about next week?
I would love to find out.
Even though we're doing next week.
Yeah, and I'm very excited.
So, ladies and gentlemen, before I tell you all what we're going to be talking about next week, we are coming up close to the end of season 7. Finally, after 10 fucking months. This will be my last pick before the series, which I am also picking, as we always do. So next week, my final pick will be an Akira Kurosawa movie, our third one for the season. So next week, we are doing High and Low. All I know about this movie is the wrong kid gets kidnapped. And what do?
And I love it. That's what you know about it.
I mean, you've told me that even though you love Seven Samurai, that Kurosawa's modern films are on a whole nother level.
I love his contemporary films. I mean, his samurai stuff is iconic and it's great and amazing and whatever. But High and Low, man, is such a killer movie, man. It's so good. I mean, we'll get into it, but there's things he does with his actors and how he arranges them on screen. It's completely brilliant. He's genius, and you're just like, who thinks of stuff like that? How can you? It's truly. He takes the visual medium and he just uses every bit he can get out of it. It's so good.
Yeah, and this will be the 4th one we've done over the whole podcast, with the first being Rashomon, and Seven Samurai, and then Ikuru, and now High and Low, man, and I'm really excited. I love Kurosawa. I can't wait. I still have Dreams on my wish list. I want that so badly.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's good. I have it.
Yeah, I'm jealous. Well, all right, everyone. Well, we hoped you enjoyed the Sweet Smell of Success. Of course, we will be back in person next week. And we will see you next week.
Sorry.
Oh, no.
People just only had a small seizure just then. I got the shivs.
I know, and the people on mic are like, what's happening? Why hasn't Rain finished the outro?
It's my fault. Sorry.
Anyway, well, we will see everyone next week for High and Low.